Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. The weather turned bad in an instant, as if someone had accidentally knocked down the settings. The sky was covered with clouds. It became dark and not drops, but whole jets of rain poured down on the ground. Mason, an experienced veterinarian, turned on his fog lights and slowed down. Today he had another unfortunate animal brought to him that had been hit by a car. Luckily, kind-hearted people managed to run to the vet in time. The kitty survived. But how many of them are left to die by the roadside? "It's amazing," Mason said, turning to Ava, his friend and partner. "How do they run over these dogs and cats? You'd have to be blind." "Oh, Mason," Ava replied. "Animals aren't people, after all. They don't always sense danger." "No," argued the veterinarian. "I've always said and still say they live more rational lives, especially dogs." "Dogs?" The woman was surprised. "They're nice, of course, but they have brains." "I'm sorry, my little bunny. They just don't have brains." "Dogs are my weakness," Mason said passionately as he sat behind the wheel of a brand new Ford pickup truck. "I've worked with all kinds of animals, but my favorite thing in the world is dogs. I love those dogs. They can't solve a math problem, but they can figure out where to get food. Isn't that intelligence?" For a while, the vet and his partner drove in silence. The abominable weather was forcing him to pay maximum attention. Then the man realized that Ava might have misunderstood his words. He turned all red and blushed. And then he blurted out, "I'm sorry, dear," Mason said. "I forgot to tell you that of all the animals, I love you the most. You're the closest to me." Now it was Ava's turn to blush. He was comparing her to his patients again. However, the woman was too tactful to point out to her partner the inadmissibility of such analogies, and his compliment. Even if it didn't work, he was trying. "Watch the road, darling," she said. "See how nasty the weather is. A good master wouldn't kick his dog out." Nature's mood had really turned nasty today. It was pouring rain, strong winds, and on top of that, the visibility was abysmal. But the car was warm and cozy, and the body of the Ford reliably absorbed all the street noises. Powerful headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the road for dozens of meters ahead. "Calm down, my dear," the vet said with a smile. "I'll get you there safely. My car is my fortress." "Why did you buy yourself a pickup truck?" Ava stretched out. "There's no room in the back row." The woman hated those American toys for big boys. In her mind, a pickup truck was just a waste of money. If she had her way, she would have bought a huge minivan or even a minibus that could seat a whole family, along with all the toys and stuff. Mason, though, didn't get the hint at all, didn't buy this one back either. "Honey, the pickup is for my patients," he said. "You know, it's hard for us to afford a driver and special transportation. This way, the body is at the complete disposal of the poor animals." "That's great. And you won't have to inhale their odors. Even though I've told you 100 times there's nothing disgusting about them." Ava could only say nothing. She loved animals, but separately and from a distance. She could never keep more than one pet in her house, and one was a huge responsibility. But Mason's different. He's a genius in the world of veterinary medicine. He also knows how to do everything. It's like the animals lay out their symptoms to him, and he hears their complaints. "Oh, crap," cussed the vet again. "These blind drivers who can't see cats and dogs have ruined my mood, and you can't even hold them accountable. I'd take away my license and my car for that kind of thing." Mason was sure he could pass a burning car, or even a bicyclist, past a house on fire. It's just that he'd never been in those situations before. But he's never passed a dog that's been run over. He chose his profession to be a veterinarian, an animal rescuer. Mason had dreamed of going into animal welfare at the state level, but there was no time for that. "You're such a good doctor," Ava praised him and decided to go in head on. "I think you'd be a great father, too." At this point, the vet didn't hear her, immersed in his own thoughts. They had already passed the freeway and turned toward the township where their cabin was located. Those bums at the power company had done something wrong again. The lights on the tall poles weren't on. Mason turned his headlights to maximum brightness and looked at the road. He slowed his speed to 15 miles an hour. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Ava asked, not waiting for an answer to her line about her father. "I agree with you completely," the man replied. His partner glowed. "Does he really want children? He literally never leaves the side of his animals." "Then he smells like God forgive him." No, he should open his own clinic a long time ago and keep his practice to a minimum. I mean, look at him. He's like an executive. And my God, he looks just like the president. Mason looks just like Mr. Binday when he was younger. He went to law school and worked as a lawyer. Well, to each his own. If her man didn't have to work 24 hours a day, they could have had a baby a long time ago. "The weather's brutal," the vet said and squinted. "I can't see our house. I'm following the instruments, honey." "Drive carefully," Ava nodded. "You can't be too careful." "I'm always careful," Mason agreed eagerly. "It's my principle. If you're not sure, don't overtake. If you don't know what's next, slow down." He wanted to say something else, but then he hit the brake. The wheels squealed and Ava with them. They saw something on the road that made their hearts clench. Jack is a young anarchist. He's not even 20. Griff is different. He had eaten not only his dog in the revolutionary struggle, but also a few minor politicians. At 35, he's realized he's done too much for this country. Now, it's just a matter of taking his rightful place somewhere at the top and make sure that all the elite, the rich people in expensive suits lose their capital. "In this country, you can't achieve anything by your own labor," Jack resented. "Yes, I have no education. Yes, I didn't finish high school. But why, pray tell? Do I have to work for $10 an hour? Do I look like a volunteer? I'd rather not work at all than slave for pennies." "I agree," Griff nodded. "You're just young and green, but you're moving in the right direction. Yes, the world is an unfair place, and it's unfair in everything from resource allocation to wages. But it's not about money." "What is it about?" Jack asked. "The very structure of the system," the adult anarchist explained. "Until you get to the top, you're nobody. And if you're already on some floor of Trump Tower or Bush Tower, you don't want to let outsiders in. You'll smoke them out by any means necessary. Call them terrorists, abusers, gaslighters. Anything to keep someone else from taking your place." Jack sighed. In his early 20s, he had all sorts of ideas in his head, often so contradictory as to be mutually exclusive. On the one hand, he wanted to be rich, to have a house where he could gather classically close friends from all over the world, to buy a huge bus to take like-minded people to rallies. On the other hand, he wished there was no money at all, that everyone got exactly what they deserved, to do the work he liked. Jack was sure that in such a world he would have the most deserved place. But to build this marvelous order, the old had to be destroyed. "Unions are being squeezed," Griff complained. "Have you heard about the new reform? Now even this slave order will be gone. Feudalism is coming. Pure feudalism." "Of course it is," Jack blurted out. He didn't know what the word feudalism meant, but there was no stopping the young man. "It's a misunderstanding, not a reform. It looks like stupidity, but it's actually a crime." The young man read the draft of the new law but understood nothing about it. Then he tried to understand the opinions of experts, but there were even more unfamiliar words. Perhaps he should not have skipped school lessons in such quantities. However, his left-wing comrades told him that the innovations would simply destroy labor unions. that only those unions would be preserved that fully satisfied the current government, and workers' rights would once again be trampled on. "I think we should show who is the boss in this country," Jack said with heat. "Like in the good old days. There was a time when workers were considered. You could buy a brand new car for half a year's wages." He'd read stories about movements that governments called extremist. But he realized that such a thing was unthinkable now. No one would approve of saviors who were guided only by violence. Griff, who still dreamed of getting into big politics, was not eager to engage in terror either. He was reviled by everyone, east and west. "You understand," Griff said. "We have to take deliberate steps. Don't forget that we have comrades behind us. And every action we take must be weighed very carefully. Party. One name for it." Jack had seen these pathetic gatherings of marginalized people, and they didn't make a good impression on him. At the best of times, there were about 20 people in attendance, and it seemed only to drink cheap beer and barbecue after a heated discussion of Marxist ideals. Of course, Griff had his sights set on a leadership position in the Shop Stewards Union, but this organization did not inspire the young anarchist much. To be a big shot there, but only to get $20 an hour for nothing. "We need an action that will get us talked about," Jack said with inspiration. "We've got to get to somebody at the top of these corrupt politicians and tell them what we think of this system, where the only rights a worker has are the right to a free cremation after death. From the very top." Griff was surprised. He liked the young comrade's pressure. "Maybe you're talking about that one." "Don't say it," the young man demanded. He believed in all conspiracy theories combined, especially the one that every cell phone had sensors that triggered key words, like saying President Twin Towers or Pentagon. Those were words he simply never said, replacing them with euphemisms. "Wow," Griff marveled. "I envy your tenacity. What would you like to do to him?" "Not him," Jack shook his head. "Let's be realistic. You can't get within a stone's throw of someone you can't name. They're watching everything, controlling everything. I'm talking about the people closest to him, his loved ones." The anarchist rubbed his temples. "I admit I've had similar thoughts." Nodded the young man. "But how do we get people to talk about us? Murder is so petty. Kidnapping a child or a wife is inhuman, but our action must not be toothless. We must show this country that we can act, that we've been written off too soon." "I think I have an idea," Griff smiled. "You'll like it." It did seem like a strange idea, but it made sense to Jack. And most importantly, if they succeeded, their names would be written in gold in the history of the American resistance. It's hard to explain the friendship between man and dog. It's beyond reason. It's as if the master and his pet become one. Mr. Bind loved Wokey. As a child, he already had a dog, Roy, a huge and obese saint, Bernard. Together they grew up, the future president of the United States upward and the dog outward. The dog was smart, polite, and also very voracious. His appetite was legendary in his hometown of Binda. "Give him an elephant, and he would eat it," complained the grandfather of the future president, a very economical and thrifty man. "Not a dog, but a ruin. But he is guarding us." The young man carefully expressed his disagreement. "For such a thing, you can feed him once more." "Guarding?" The grandfather was indignant. "Yeah, he did not even wake up when those hooligans wanted to steal my bike. Good thing I noticed and kicked their greedy asses." The dog really wasn't equipped to guard his grandfather's huge farm. It was an area that a dozen dogs couldn't control. But that didn't upset young Binder in the least. Only with a dog he felt a mental connection, complete mutual understanding, and for such a thing he could forgive his pet anything. Laziness in the first place. When Bind was 18 years old and was taking his college exams, Roy suddenly departed for dog heaven. At that time, the dog had already passed his second decade. But he looked very alert and healthy. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, but it came. The future president was so upset that he forbade to ever get another pet. "I swear I'll never get a dog again," young Vine said. "Roy's death is a great loss to me. Yeah, it's like burying a friend. What's a brother's friend? Sometimes I feel like his big carcass is right here, right next to me. I can even hear him snoring at night." The future president's greatest burden was that he was far away when his pet died. He didn't share his last hours with him, didn't give him a bowl of water, and didn't give him a bowl of water, and didn't give him a last hug. He had kept his promise for 40 years, no less. Graduated with honors from the university, where he was president of the faculty for the first election, which he won. Worked a little in his specialty, but quickly found himself in politics. And now, when the 70-year mark loomed on the horizon, a small animal appeared in his life. At a regular meeting with voters, someone called a dog breeder, and she brought 5 puppies. One of them nimbly outran the guards and fell right into Mr. Bindu's lap. He rolled over onto his back, and the president couldn't resist the temptation to pat the little dog's belly. In front of him was a shaggy-eared, odd-looking little fellow who was not the least bit embarrassed by his ornamental appearance. Unlike Roy, the little dog was small. But he had a big heart. It was love at first sight. Mr. Bind took him in his arms, and from then on they were almost never parted. "Whose baby is this?" the president asked excitedly, stroking the puppy on the head. "Yours," the woman replied, smiling awkwardly and looking out from behind the guards. "May my litter always accompany you." Mr. Bind threw up his hand in his trademark salute, though the word litter amused him. He had been given many gifts, even a plot of land on the moon, but this was the first time he had ever been given a dog. The little fellow had chosen him, though. Who is he to take the American dream away from a citizen of the United States, even if that citizen is a dog? Wacky accompanied the president like a shadow. This dog stood out from the rest of the breed. For one thing, he was smart. The little dog learned several commands and also unmistakably distinguished his people from strangers. Secondly, Pekingese was physically developed. Both front and back legs were longer and stronger. He could jump onto a sofa or chair and climb back down without hurting himself. It's a mockery of the breed. A professional dog handler called by an aide told the president. Absolutely healthy. Vaccinated, but we call that kind of thing a marriage. "I call him Wacky," Mr. Bind replied good-naturedly, though he found the dog breeder's words discriminatory. No, such language should be avoided, even when it came to animal. The president was fond of his dog. His children were long gone, and he spent minimal time on his grandchildren for safety reasons. Only Wokey was always there. At times, Bind felt as if the dog listened and understood him, and as if giving advice on the level of thought. "Don't quarrel with the third world," the Pekingese once told him, and Bind changed his mind about introducing new restrictions. Like Roy, Wokey didn't demand too much. He was willing to lie around for hours under the table somewhere. He'd run outside to take a piss or tackle a tougher task. He also became a general favorite of his team. Every White House staffer considered it his duty to babysit and feed Wokey. Heavy feeding, however, did not lead to obesity. The doggy remained as agile and lean as possible. But one day the dog went missing. Mr. Binder could have sworn he'd seen the dog a few minutes ago while he was giving another interview, and then Wacky disappeared. Where had he gone? That was the question he put to his entourage. Half an hour later, a bewildered aide entered the office without knocking. The president sighed. Although he treated his subordinates leniently, Patrick knew exactly the condition. "Call before reporting." "Mr. President," whispered the aide. "Mr. President, trouble, tragedy, emergency." "Well, go ahead," Mr. Bindi waved his hand. "Save me time, Patrick. We could spend it building a better future for our country." Yes, of course," nodded the aide. "But," and as the staffer finished his report, the president experienced a feeling similar to Roy's loss: pain, longing, and incomprehension. However, he kept his feelings safely hidden this time. There was no reason for the others to see him suffer. The music was playing loudly in the car, so loud that the driver and passenger had to yell. But that was fine with them. The American wind blew through the open windows, which they both thought was the smell of freedom. At times, the young boy and his much older companion would sing along to the radio. But they bragged more about their good fortune. "I told you the White House was a thoroughfare," Griff grinned as they rode in the van. "A thoroughfare for simpletons. I'm surprised Trump hasn't taken up residence there." "Yeah," Jack nodded. "Maybe we should have had that, the president, the rich. That," and the guy made a meaningful gesture with his hand as if drawing a dotted line around his neck. That's the kind of thinking that must be going through most anarchists' heads. They somehow believe that if you take a queen off the table, no more pawns can turn into queens in time. "You are out of your mind," replied the comrade. "Remember, violence is not our method. We have a specific goal and a plan. We will stick to it, then everything will work out." "Okay," the young man waved his hand. "You're smarter than that. I was sure we'd get caught. But then at least we'd be on the evening edition of Today. That's not so bad." "Silly," Griff grinned. "All you want to do is get on the news. Remember, you have to be bold but quiet. And in your vanity, don't forget your comrades. Remember how many people are behind us and how much they want us to win." Everything went easily and quickly, as if by notes. The White House beckoned Griff the way a beggar is attracted to a luxurious mansion. He liked to observe this magnificent building, at least from afar, and he had long ago noticed that on the lawn, where the president likes to speak, there is a small passage between the parts of the fence. A man could never fit through it, but a dog could. The same mutt that two-faced Bindi always drags around with him. Now it was just a matter of time. While Griff, distracted the lazy cop, Jack baited the dog with a brownie. These Peking G's are voracious as hell. Grabbing the most popular dog in the U.S., the young man shoved him under the bike and carried him to the car they rented on fake ID. "You know what I'm thinking?" Griff asked, smiling. They didn't even miss him. They didn't even remember the dog. We're listening to the radio and nobody even interrupts. Probably won't even come to their senses until we send the message. They won't wake up." Oh, Jack nodded. "They don't care about the workers or the animals. They don't care about the environment and the children. And those poor mothers who have to work instead of spending time with their daughters and sons. It's okay, we'll change the world. It's only a matter of time." When Jack was 10 years old, he first learned that robots could take over all the physical labor in the world, and that the day was not far off when human labor would no longer be necessary. You can just get everything you need for free: a plasma, a set, top box, a phone, coupons for meals at cafes. And in your free time, you can do your favorite things. Play the console, play ball, barbecue, sit at your favorite fast food restaurant. That each person will get his own house with a large backyard attic and gazebo. You can sleep as much as you want. Do not run early in the morning to school or the office. It's beautiful. "I'm not going to study," Jack declared to his parents, digesting these thoughts in his head. "What's the point? I'll study to be a doctor, and 10 years from now there'll be a robot doctor. Smarter than me, actually." "Ma, you've seen how these irons stitch together a cut grape, right? I'll never be able to do that. I'll never be able to do that. I'll wait. Pretty soon it'll be free. You'll see." But that's not what happened. Robots have already displaced humans, taking away all sorts of jobs from picking potatoes on the farm to assembling cars. But it was the industrialists and the rich who profited. The average person who wasn't ready to sit around at university had no choice but to get a job at Uber or deliver food. That's how Jack came to hate industrialists. He believed that they were responsible for the fact that most of the world is sitting in poverty instead of getting free cottages with backyards, plasma, and counsel. And the only way to bring these underdogs down is through labor unions. And while Bind thinks he'll cut off the oxygen of labor with his new law, he's wrong. And he'll pay dearly for it. Mr. Binder was known for his calm. When he heard the news that his pet was missing, he didn't even change his face. Patrick, the president's closest aide and one of his closest employees, was surprised at his chief's indifference. In fact, Binder's soul was aflame, and his hands, which immediately clenched into fists to the point of pain, the man hid behind his jacket. A few hours later, Patrick returned to the Oval Office with a detailed report. "Who was the last person to see Woki?" the president asked in a perfectly calm voice. "Shauna," the aide shrugged. "That body-positive woman from public relations. Claims she offered him some nuggets, but our boy refused. He doesn't like spicy food." "What time was this?" Mr. Bind continued his questioning. "No later than 11 o'clock, Patrick replied. "And at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I missed the dog." The president stood up and walked around his Oval Office. Yes, this room had known more serious causes for concern. But for some reason, Mr. Binder's missing dog had hit him hard. He probably would have been less surprised to learn that a North Korean missile had reached the coast of the United States. "I'll bet he was kidnapped," said the president. "But by who? Who could have gotten in the way of this little rascal? Those soulless devils. Such scoundrels have nothing sacred. We must be there to help the weak." The voice of the man in authority trembled. At that moment, Patrick realized that Mr. Bind was much more deeply affected by the loss of his dog than he might at first appear. It was understandable. Wacky, everyone's favorite, was an extremely charming dog. He didn't have a single envious or unkind person in his life, except for the head cat of the White House. But that one was beyond suspicion. "Maybe we should make an official statement," an aide whispered. "No," the president shook his head. "We need to make sure that Woki really has been kidnapped. Get me Big Paul for a report. Quickly. Stump our minds to go through all the cameras. I need to know exactly who last saw him and where." "Copy that," shouted the assistant and rushed out the door. He only calmed down when he was given a challenge. The harder the better. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening and still no news of Woki's fate. Truly, the little dog moved about the White House as he pleased, and tracking her movements through the cameras proved to be no easy task. The Pekingese would not fit into some of the lenses because of its size. A minute later, Big Paul walked into the office. His nickname would have been Giant. The huge African-American, if necessary, could cover not one, but 3 recent U.S. presidents with his mighty back. The chief of security was famous, not only for his physical strength, but also for his great intelligence. He was enough to create an illusion of his own indispensability in the most powerful man on earth. "Mr. President," said the chief of security as he saluted and stepped into the office. Mr. Bind physically felt the rush of air that shook the big man's jacket. "Every effort is being made to find your little associate. We're working closely with the FBI and the CIA. I swear to God we'll find this doggy wherever he is. And if a single hair on his back, easy." The president waved his hand. "Kidnapping hasn't been proven yet. What do we know so far?" "We have mapped the movements of the Pekingese," said Big Paul with a serious face and showed the tablet. The red line running through the schematic map of the building perfectly illustrated Brownian motion. There was no logic to the dog's movements. What were they wasting their time on? "Maybe he was wandering somewhere on the adjacent property," Mr. Bind said. "Or maybe he was accidentally picked up by some kind-hearted citizens." Woki's image was uploaded to SARI by our recognition program, Big Paul reported. "The doggy didn't show up on any cameras outside the White House. Still, that doesn't mean he hasn't escaped," the president exhaled. "I want you to sweep the entire area. Think of something." While the security chief was digesting the information, the selector beeped. Patrick finally remembered to make a phone call before reporting. He'd come in twice without knocking, had the doggy been discovered. That would be damn good news, thought the leader of the states, pressing the button. "Mr. President," an aide shouted in a broken voice. "Mr. President, they sent it. Those bastards sent." "Okay, calm down and say it slowly," Mr. Bine demanded. "What did they send?" What Patrick said made the president feel a sharp pain and resentment again. But there was relief along with it, a kind of ghostly hope. The unfortunate dog, struck by an inattentive driver, was quickly moved into the cabin. The vet took only a quick glance at the little guy and immediately realized that he needed immediate help. It was possible to try to provide it right here, on the road. But the only thing in the car, as it turned out, was a human first aid kit. And he needs tools and medicine for animals. All that's at home, as well as the conditions to call for help. "What's wrong with him?" Ava asked, looking at the dog with a mixture of fear and pity. "It looks like Sepphoris," the vet replied, trying to look at the dog's pupils. "But Pekingese eyes are wide enough to make no sense. Come on, let's go. There's no time to lose." He started the engine and handed the carcass with the sticky fur to his partner. She looked at the poor animal with disgust. But she got over herself and accepted the dog. She even cuddled him to her and began to nuzzle him. "Probably forgot to take it home with them," Mason said, pressing the gas pedal. "These Pekingese aren't smart enough. Pete advocates will forgive me. It's a breed trait, they can forget where they live. Well, it's hard for them to remember where they live, especially in apartment buildings. By the way, there are no such in our village." "That's the trouble," cried Ava, cradling the little creature. Who could have done such a thing to this adorable little thing? She wrapped it in the towel she took with her to the fitness club. A slim figure was extremely important to a woman. She was afraid that if she got fat, Mason would stop paying attention to her altogether. "Listen, is your heart beating?" the vet asked, looking at the road. "We'll be home in a couple minutes." Ava concentrated. Through the cloth of the towel, she could feel the dog breathing. It was like he was snoring, but quietly. "I can't hear his heart, but I can feel his breathing," she replied. "I think he's alive." "What are you going to do?" "We should check him out," the man said, parking in front of the house. "I could take him to work, but it's 30 miles away. We'll treat him right here in our house, so no more soap operas." "I'm sorry, darling." Together they rented a small house in the Washington suburbs, and they paid rent equally, as Ava insisted, although her income was very modest. She was an intern at a law firm and was going to make a career as a lawyer. Mason, though well off, spent a good half of his income on animals. He was obsessed with his little brothers. "Follow me," the vet demanded, striding quickly to the door. As he walked, he took out a key and opened the lock. Their house was very modest. 1 bedroom, a living room, kitchen, and a tiny hallway with a bathroom, and a small garage. Nothing without it. Mason quickly cleared the table of whatever was in his way and spread out a clean sheet, the same linen set Ava had given him for their anniversary. At this point, though, she was willing to forgive her partner's inattention. "Get some water in the basin," the vet demanded, putting the dog down, "and find a rag of some kind." The woman rushed to comply. Mason himself was preparing an IV and a surgical instrument. He quickly found the wound on the dog's right leg. The cut, however, was small. There was no point in suturing it. He thoroughly cleaned the wound and then the whole dog. Pekingese have long hair, which made it difficult to see. The vet checked his pulse, put a thermometer in, barely found a vein to insert a catheter, put in an IV. "A Pekingese," Mason stretched out, trying to take up the silence. "A mestizo, I'd say. Not exactly breed, standardized." "I think he's cute," the woman said. "I don't care what the standards are. The doggy still wouldn't regain consciousness. The car must not have hit him, just hit him with a bumper or a wheel. Maybe the driver was trying to avoid a hit and run. That's why the doggy went into a deep sleep. We can't rule out head trauma, the vet said. Must be a concussion. He's completely unresponsive to external stimuli. Some dogs sleep like the dead, though. Will he live? Ava asked in a frightened voice. She thought it would be a terrible shock for her to see a sweet dog die. After something like that, she'd have to go to a counselor for years to heal the trauma. I guess so, Mason answered her, taking off his rubber gloves. If he makes it through the morning, I'll take him to X-ray right away. We need to check all the bones. Run some tests. I think we should show him to Frank. He's a specialist in these little things. Let's go to bed soon, honey, she asked, putting her arm around the man's shoulders. This adventure has worn me out so much. No, he said. The patient is unstable. I must stay with him and stay here all night. Go to bed without me, dear. Even though Mason was a very disciplined doctor, he still fell asleep with his hands and head on the table. And when the sun woke him up at 6 in the morning, the appearance of the Pekingese veterinarian was quite surprising and even puzzled him. Big Paul stepped aside, letting Patrick pass. There was literally no face on him. In his hand, he held a clear baggie, and inside it, "So," said Mr. Bind, looking at his assistant. "What's the news?" Although the president was not young, he had a peculiar aura of authority about him. In his presence, people became timid and ingratiating. It's hard to tell if it was just because of the gentleman's position or something else. Mr. Binder's smile bribed and reassured. Housewives who spend a good half of their day watching TV and social media were willing to give him far more than their own vote. Kidnapped, the aide exhaled. Stolen. What makes you so sure they have Walkie? The imperious man asked. It wasn't hard to guess, the aide replied, wiping away tears. He placed a clear bag on the table in front of his boss. Inside was a red collar with a chip. The man examined the message carefully. There could be no mistake. Those soulless bastards had removed everything that would help identify Wookie, except for one little trinket, however. So we're dealing with a kidnapping, Mr. Bind said calmly. Yeah, that was a tough scenario to calculate. You know, you can prepare for any kind of sneak attack, but even that's too much. You were right to put all this stuff in a clear bag. You didn't touch it. No, the assistant nodded. Only with gloves. Looking at the determined leader, Patrick calmed down too. He wiped his tears and felt ashamed that he had let his feelings out. However, the president appreciated him for his sincerity. He needed just such an employee. Intelligent but direct. You can't overlook the calculation, Patrick said. I've scrutinized the code. All they can be charged with is animal cruelty. And that's if they don't feed and walk it. Technically, a dog is considered property, but we're not talking about theft. Mr. Bind listened to these platitudes with a calm face. As a professional lawyer, shouldn't he understand such simple truths? But he's never argued with his subordinates over trivial matters. If Patrick wants to be clever, be my guest. Let him assert himself. I hope that these insolents have some humanity left in their souls, said the president. And they won't deny our little comrade food and water, and sweet bones, of course. Yes, that's his favorite, replied the aide, and almost cried again. He had just bought a pack of them the day before yesterday, hoping to treat Wookie. He tried to control his feelings for a while. This collar came with the manifesto, Patrick continued. Shall I read it out? No. The president shook his head. I hope you've already called forensics. We'll need to take a closer look. Of course, at the same moment, said the aide. But I took the liberty of showing the collar to you first. No one saw it go missing. The president said calmly. I think Walkie must have fought like a little lion. No, Patrick shook his head. Our texts say we've already got 2 suspects. 2 women. They're being watched. Good, replied the president. All charges must be carefully worded and substantiated. However, I will personally talk to the prosecutor on this topic. Are you not interested in the manifesto at all? The aide asked with surprise. There is much to read, I assure you. Absolutely not. What are they asking for? The man asked imperiously. They want union reform repealed, Mr. President, the aide said. The collar came with the terrorist demands. They call themselves the New Freedmen. Mr. Bind sighed. He'd seen a lot of bad guys in his life. But the New Freedomers were really something fresh. He'd never heard of them before. He should thank God, though, that it had occurred to those freaks to kidnap a dog and not his granddaughter. Never. The leader shook his head. Never will we meet the demands of terrorists. They don't know who Walkie is yet. He'll be sure to give them a light. He stood up and walked around the office. Union reform was part of his campaign program. To back away from it now would be to cheat the voters. It would also undermine the credibility of the institutions that had long wanted to clamp down on unions. On the other hand, this is Walkie. Not some nameless dog. Certainly not a granddaughter, but Big Paul, what's the matter with you? Mr. Bind asked the big man. Get back to work. You must personally supervise the process. Aye, said the head of security and rushed out the door. Skinny Patrick followed him, nearly knocked down by the air current. Wait, the president called out to the assistant. About this very union reform. Yes. Patrick turned around, pulled out a notebook, ready to write. Here's what we're going to do, Mr. Bind answered carelessly. We're not talking about abolition, of course. But, writing down his boss's instructions, his assistant was surprised, but he didn't understand. At least it seemed so to him. After the main part of the plan was executed, the anarchists faced boredom. They had captivated not only the dog, but themselves as well. Neither of them had ever had a pet in their lives, and now they found themselves with a lot of time on their hands. And you can't leave a dog alone. You have to be on your guard and never show your Pekingese to anyone. Griff rented a small house in the Washington suburbs. Jack stayed at his friend's house for the duration of their campaign, but he had to sleep on a yoga mat. His accomplice had only a small couch at home, and even that was trying to take away his Pekingese. The agile dog was obviously not enough space in a small house. What a cute dog, Jack marveled, playing with Wacky. Look, he brings the balloon too. With these words, the anarchist threw the rubber toy to the farthest end of the room. Wagging his tail, the Pekingese dashed after the ball. He grabbed the ball and galloped to his captor, which caused him genuine delight. What a sweet dog, Griff mocked him. I'm going to cry. Let's make a video with him and circulate it on social media. That's a great idea, Jack said excitedly. Is it okay that we kidnapped him? That's what I'm telling you, asshole, Griff said, and slapped his partner in the face. What are we, bloggers or students? We're working class. We have a goal, and we've identified the means available to achieve it. But Wacky's so cute, Jack argued, rubbing the back of his head. He's so cool. Does our class struggle concern dogs too? It touches everything, Griff replied calmly. Don't get used to him. A dog is just a thing. The bigwigs have even made nature work for them. Do you know how many hundreds of bucks a distant ancestor of a wolf like this is worth? I'm telling you, don't get attached to that colt on legs. Because if that stubborn old man refuses to do what we want, Griff made a meaningful gesture, showing how the noose tightened around his neck and pointed his finger at Woki. He hesitated and sat on his hind legs. It looked as if he had understood his captor's words perfectly. All right, Jack nodded. Here's what I'm thinking. Maybe we should contact the press. Tell them what we've done. Dumbass, Griff shouted. We don't want cheap publicity. We have a goal in mind, you know. If the old devil repeals union reform, we'll give him the dog. And if he doesn't, you know, we gotta go all the way. See, I've been thinking, Jack went on. Usually kidnappers somehow keep in touch with the people they're trying to influence. It's like that in all the movies and some of the games, and we just kind of threw out the demands and that's it. What if they have questions? Griff thought for a moment. His uneducated comrade's words had some common sense, But contacting the White House was too risky. They must be searching for that little Pekingese. They'll trace the call with ease. Let's read up on our action, Griff suggested. He opened Google, typed Woki into the search box, and began to study. Nothing. There wasn't even any news about his disappearance. But as it turns out, the Pekingese leads a busy life, accompanied his master in his trips to Europe, the Middle East, and even Australia. Griff felt a sharp envy. He had never even traveled outside the United States in his life. He'd never even been to the sea or the mountains. And here's some hulking mockery of nature who's traveled halfway around the world, just because his master is the President of America. How unfair the world is. "Victory!" shouted Jack. "Buddy, we won." The boy ran up to his comrade, hugged him, and began to jump. Woki, too, stood on his hind legs and turned around several times as if to share the cheers. Griff stared at his mate for a while, disbelieving his optimism. Then he took his cell phone from his hands and began to read the news that caused such a wave of enthusiasm in the young man. Victory. He was indignant. "You call this a victory?" "Yes," he nodded. "They suspended the reform. Exactly what you and I wanted. Now we have to get the dog back." "Suspended, not cancelled," Griff shouted. "We have to go all the way." Jack scratched his head and sat down. He scrutinized the news again, racking his brain. It did indeed say that the reform was suspended pending consultations with the expanded Council of Trade Unions, the very one in whose interest all this fuss had been started. "Right," Jack whispered. "Those bastards. They almost had me fooled." "What am I telling you?" said the Griff, a frightful smile on his face. "They're like hustlers, they'll get you around. You stick with me, you won't lose." The anarchist already had a new plan of action in his head. And what he was going to do would not please anyone, not even young Jack, his faithful friend and comrade. It had been a full day since Wacky had gone missing. Mr. Bind had cancelled all meetings and events to focus on finding his pet. Journalists competed in speculation as to what could have caused this behavior. There were various versions, from unknown illness of the president to banal fatigue. Patrick entered the office. His red eyes showed that he had slept for a couple of hours during the night. "Good morning, Chief," he said. "Alas, no results. What we can say with certainty is that they were well-trained men. Maybe they were trained in China or Iran." "Have our experts studied the message?" Mr. Bind asked. "They have," Patrick nodded. "Nothing. No skin cells, no fingerprints. Nothing. Delivered from the post office by quadricopter. We made a request to the operator's company for nothing. Professionals," Mr. Bind said, as if he were praising the kidnappers. "Calculated everything down to the last detail. And after my tactical move, there were attempts to contact us. Nothing." Mr. Bind waved his hands. "They are waiting and silent. We have no contact with the kidnappers." Mr. Bind felt guilt again, as he had with Roy years ago. Maybe Woki's not alive anymore. And he didn't even spend his last hours with him. Didn't give him a bowl of water, didn't pat his ears. It's a shame to lose a friend, especially when they're taken away by scoundrels just because you're president. "I don't want publicity," the president said. "If the press asks questions, deny everything. Pretend it's not happening." "But, Mr. Bind," the aide began to argue, "what if the voters think the president's a liar? According to public opinion polls, Woki is the most recognizable member of the Oval Office. More popular than my vice president?" Bind squinted. "Than the Secretary of State?" "Yes," said the aide. "Woki's rating is a good dozen points higher. Let's be objective. Your whole office is a shabby mess. In the 3 years we've been working in Washington, everyone's got skeletons. The Vice President and the Secretary of State. Hell, even you." "Go on," Mr. Bind nodded. He valued his assistant not only for his loyalty but also for his ability to take the bitter truth for granted. "A dog is a different matter," Mr. Bind said. "It is impossible not to love her. According to recent polls, only ardent cat people have a negative attitude toward Wookie. And not all of them. I'm afraid the disappearance of your doggie could seriously hurt ratings and also make citizens feel insecure. Remember why Trump lost? When there was a pandemic raging around the world, he pretended it wasn't happening. I can understand that, sighed Mr. Bind. But the people wanted safety, the aide exclaimed. They wanted vaccines and all that. That's why he didn't win the second round. I think the whole truth should be told. Maybe they'll help find it. Still, the president objected. It's not just a dog, it's a family member. A member of the government, if you will. I think publicity could only hurt him. Think of what these subhumans could do. Maybe it's in my interest to tell the truth, to look strong in the eyes of the electorate, but not in Wookie's interest. The men were silent. Mr. Bind plunged into reminiscence. As he grew older, this was happening to him more and more. And Patrick pondered, his head working like a computer. Suddenly his face brightened as if he had found the solution to a mouth problem with an asterisk. I have a suggestion, the assistant said and blushed a little. A very bold idea, in the spirit of the former Soviet Union. Go ahead, the president waved his hand. I always welcome ideas. But the aide's suggestion made Mr. Binder's eyes water. And although he was forced to admit that the idea was worthwhile, the deception could cost him more than it did Trump in 2020. Another morning came. Using the rights of the senior, Griff loaded his young comrade with various things. For example, he had to make scrambled eggs for breakfast, wash the dishes, and clean the yard. He also had to ride his bike to the store to buy groceries. By 12 o'clock, all the chores were done. Jack was passionately playing some game on his cell phone, and Wacky was asleep in the corner. All the doggy did was snooze, fall asleep, or chatter his paws in his sleep. He showed no aggression toward his captors. The ringleader, standing in front of the mirror, looked at the doggy and at the same time made himself up. Picked out the best t-shirt, the cleanest, whole socks, neat jeans, fixed his greasy hair, and wished he'd taken a shower this morning. I'm out to here, Griff said, packing. Business. Party fight? Jack asked. Sure, nodded his partner. They've forgotten what workers' rights are in their offices. I'll remind them of everything. Until the working class is treated with justice, nothing in this world will change. By the way, I'll leave you with an important task. What? Clean the yard of Wookie's little bombs. Jack smiled. I've already done it. Don't look at him. He's such a baby. He shits like a big one. It's too easy a task for you, Griff replied. You know, it takes all the proletarian hatred you can muster, that you're capable of. Here are your tools for fighting for your rights. The older comrade waved his hand in the direction of the coffee table. Jack looked at it in bewilderment. There was a tourniquet, hydrogen peroxide, and bandages, and a garden pruner on the tabletop. How had he missed all that equipment? The boy looked at his mentor. What the hell is this? He asked. It's simple, Griff shrugged. Those rascals don't want to fulfill our demands. Heck, they even almost had you fooled. What are we going to do? Jack wondered. Every day they cut off a piece of your future, the older comrade instructed. Little by little, so that you don't feel a thing. It's time for you to do the same. I didn't get it, the young man admitted rankly. He wasn't very good with metaphors. We'll bite off his paw, Griff replied. We'll send it to the president of the rich in a box. And let him try not to cancel union reform. The young man stood as if struck by thunder. His face was suddenly pale, as if it had been discolored. You're not serious now, are you? Jack asked with a silly smile. Because I've never personally cut off a dog's legs. Relax, buddy, the older man said. It's just an animal. It's not smart. It's not human. You have to tie a tourniquet, squeeze the secateurs, and that's it. Then peroxide it. He's got 4 legs. He's got a lot to spare. Jack turned even paler. He pictured the scene and he felt sick. He felt dizzy and sat down on a chair to keep from falling to the floor. Wokey woke up and lifted his muzzle, watching his captors. "This is an important part of the party struggle," Griff persuaded his sidekick. "Our ancestors bled for the leftist cause, and you can't even cut off a dog's paw. You're weak. I don't think you're ready for the decisive struggle that the working class expects from us." Jack remained silent. There were heavy thoughts in his head. When they first started this business, he had no idea how far it would go. "By the way, I've been talking to someone," Griff continued, "and they promised me a good position in the union. The kind of position where you need your own assistant. And hell, I know just who I can give the job to." "What? You're going to work for free again?" Jack asked with no enthusiasm. "No, we'll get you the proper paperwork," said his partner. "You'll get a good salary and take your revolutionary struggle to the next level. You can finally finish college, take some courses where they'll teach you how to speak properly. That's all it takes." Griff made a gesture as if he were cutting paper with his fingers and was gone. Jack was left alone with Wacky. He was fully awake and looking good-naturedly at his captor. He seemed to be smiling as he always did. The young man thought that his older friend was right about something. After all, it was only a dog. Aren't there many of them running around on the streets? On the other hand, he'd already spent a few days of his life with this little guy. "Oh, brother, what are we going to do with you?" Jack sighed and looked over the young animal breeder's kit. First, he had to know where to apply the tourniquet. Second, somehow immobilize the dog. The very idea of stripping a living creature of its limbs seemed inhuman to him. Of course, he could do something like that to people he thought were scoundrels. All those bankers, financiers, politicians, and other investors. But this was a dog, a defenseless little dog. One he'd grown to like over the past few days. Jack thought that before he lost his paw, Wokey needed a good walk, enjoy life. He even wanted to ride his bike to the store and buy him something nice. But there wasn't much money left, so he couldn't fulfill that noble impulse. "Don't be afraid of anything," said the young man. "Until the Griff comes back, I won't do anything. I'll make him buy some painkillers. In the meantime, we'll play." Just as they were planning their action, Griff and Jack fenced off a small area behind the house with netting. A prisoner needs a walk. He's a dog, not a person. The Pekingese felt perfectly well in this modest cubbyhole and did not even show that the captivity was weighing him down. The dog brought a ball and put it in front of Jack. "Do you want to play soccer?" the kidnapper asked, tossing the toy. "Come on, let's play." He tossed the ball to Wacky and he brought it back. Even on his short legs, the dog covered the distance of the yard in just a few seconds. He knew neither fatigue nor doubt. His long fur fluttered as he raced toward his goal. Once again fetching the ball, Wokey carelessly spit it out. "Oh, shit," said Jack. "You're clumsy, buddy. All right, brother, don't worry, I'll get it. It's a piece of cake." For several minutes, the young anarchist tried to retrieve the ball from under the porch. He could see it through the gap, but the toy had rolled too far away for him to reach it by hand. Eventually, Jack guessed to grab a stick to push the ball toward him. It was a good 10 minutes before he managed it. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the exertion. "He did it!" shouted the young man, tossing the ball in his hand. "Catch it, Wacky! Wacky! Hey, buddy, where are you?" Jack looked around, but the dog was nowhere to be found. He thought the dog had gone back to the house. The door was open. He went into the living room and called out to Wacky. No sign of him. He looked under the couch, behind the curtain, in the bathroom, even in the closet. No one. He whistled, clapped his hands, smacked his lips. The baby didn't respond to his calls. "Where could he have run off to?" said the young anarchist in fear, running around the house. "Come back, Wacky, we'll touch your paw. I swear it." But the dog did not respond. Then Jack decided to watch the doggy outside. The lot was very small, with no bushes or buildings of any kind. Could it have gotten under the fence? The boy rushed to the netting they had stretched along the fence. As Jack examined it, he saw something that made him fearful. Big Paul immediately dismissed the feminist theory. Yes, Two of them had been hanging around near where Mr. President's dog had disappeared. They rode up to the White House on electric scooters, carrying small handbags. Where would they put the Pekingese? Besides, the security chief reasoned, all feminists are fierce animal advocates. They'd rather kidnap the Pope than a defenseless dog. No, someone else did it. Trouble is, there's a lot of people in this neighborhood during the day. Tourists, local workers, the curious, and a Pekingese is easy to hide under a jacket if you want to. Tracking everyone who passed by his fiefdom is simply unrealistic. Besides, a man with a dog in his arms or under his jacket does not arouse suspicion. While Big Paul was doing his analytical work, Mr. Bind was digesting his assistant's strange suggestion. Up to this point, he had thought Patrick was a smart and calculating man. Now he wasn't so sure about the guy. Yeah, people change. Sometimes not for the better. It didn't seem like a crazy proposal. Still, it had a tinge of adventurism to it. A double. The president was outraged. Replace Wokey with a double. Are you crazy, Patrick? The American public and voters are behind us. They don't tolerate deception. Finding a stunt double to play Wokey is pure fraud. You won't go to jail for it, but my political career would be ruined. And yours, if that's the kind of ambition you have. But it's not a person, the deputy argued. It's just a dog. It's just a dog on which your office's ranking rests. Just a dog, shouted Mr. Bind, usually very calm. So what about the double? Patrick persisted. Should we start looking for a similar dog? No doppelgangers. The president said no doppelgangers. If you want to help find my dog, and if you don't want to, I don't want to, I don't keep anyone in office. Patrick sighed. In his mind, he wanted what was best. No one would ever uncover the deception, but he could keep the office's ratings high. He summoned Big Paul, but he resisted the temptation to sleep for a couple of hours and opened a website. But let's not talk about that yet. You called, Mr. President. The African-American showed up at the Oval Office door. No results, said Mr. Bind, still furious at Patrick's suggestion. The best experts in the world can't find a dog that went missing in broad daylight. And the scoundrels who pulled off this daring operation right under our noses. Mr. President, you shouldn't be so nervous, said the chief of security in the most caring tone he could muster. Don't forget what your doctor said about your cholesterol and your prostate. We don't want America to lose such a great leader. President blushed. Still, the chief of security was overprotective of everyone whose safety he provided, and he claimed not to be a mummy but a kind-hearted son. And, it should be noted, was extremely organic in this capacity. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Bind said. But that's not what this is about. No one should be able to walk into the White House and make their own rules with impunity. Especially not terrorists. Anarchists, Big Paul corrected him. So be it, the president said. The point hasn't changed, has it? Patrick reported that Wokey was well liked by the electorate. His untimely death could create insecurity among the American people. If there is no security even in the White House, in saying those words, Mr. Bind had something else in mind. He wanted to tell the huge African-American man that he had lost a friend, and had almost given up hope of ever getting him back. But the president doubted the chief of security could comprehend such delicate matters. I told you a long time ago that Wokey should be guarded too, Paul muttered. He's been walking around the neighborhood like a cat. I don't know much about politics, Mr. President, but it's a situation like this, and it's a very good idea to tighten the screws. Don't talk about things you don't understand, Mr. Bind sighed. Just do your job. Leave the political nuts and bolts to me, okay? We're gonna lift everybody up, Big Paul said with inspiration. The whole city, the whole state, the whole country, the whole world if we have to. No, the president interrupted him. I don't approve. Keep it subtle. No one must know that Walkie has been kidnapped. As the African-American left the office, a message came in. The scored messenger was considered the safest and most secure. After reading the message from a man even more secretive than scored, the president felt some relief and a sense of hope. Standing in front of the fence, Jack scratched his head in confusion. Had the little man circled him? Obviously, the prisoner had escaped, and had done so in the most audacious manner possible. The plastic netting that was supposed to keep the doggy out had been chewed through, as neatly as if Wokey had a pattern with him, exactly where the distance between the fence and the ground was maximized. And how much does a Pekingese need to crawl? Swinging over the fence, Jack darted down the street. He ran first one way, then the other. To the left and right, identical houses, identical cars. Only now he noticed that the whole village consisted of identical cottages similar to each other, like twin. Jack walked back to the house Griff had rented and tried to control the trouble that had come over him. Bent to the ground to look for signs of the doggy. But the last week had been eerily dry, no paw prints. Looked around for cameras. No, Griff had deliberately chosen a township without video surveillance. He hated being watched. Calm down, Jack, the young man urged himself. It's just a Pekingese, a decorative breed with the brains of a goldfish. How far did he get on his crooked legs? Jack decided to do a methodical sweep of the entire village. If he had an analytical mind, he would have realized that such a task would be difficult to accomplish alone. There were 400 identical economy class houses in this suburb. They are spread over 20 streets, straight as a string. If it weren't for the huge signs with numbers, it would be easy to get lost. Jack got on his bike and began to cut circles. He called out to the little dog and held a ball in his hand to get his attention. But the young anarchist remembered whose doggy they had kidnapped, so from the outside the search looked strange. He just whispered the name, Wacky, Wacky, and squeaked the ball. Get out of here, some old lady yelled. I got grandkids next door. It's all right, ma'am, Jack replied. I'm just looking for my little friend. He escaped through the netting, you know. I'll call the police now, the woman continued. People like you should be isolated. The young man wanted to say something offensive, but he bit his tongue. What if the old hag really did call the cops? Then he'd be in trouble. On the way back, he suddenly had a new problem. He'd completely forgotten where Griff lived. He'd forgotten the street and cottage number out of excitement. I'd better really cut that traitor's foot off, shouted the anarchist. Now, a man in his 40s looked at him suspiciously, looking like a Latino. He stopped Jack in the manner of a horseman trying to rein a wild horse. The anarchist had no choice but to slow down. Who do you think you're going to cut the foot off? The Latino asked in a husky voice. Did Pedro send you to scare me? No, senor, replied the anarchist. It is I who ride and sing the song. You'd better cut off the traitor's foot. What are you saying? The man wouldn't stop. Pedro sent you. Answer me. I have no idea who Pedro is, Jack sighed. Let me go, please. All right, get out of here, the Latino hissed. But if you ever show up on 9th Street again, you're on your own. 9th. That's the same street where Griff lives. Thank God I found the house. Jack circled the lot once more, calling loudly for Wacky. The answer was silence. He resented the behavior of the local. He had a tragedy, and they're pestering him with some incompetence. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a weekday. Doesn't anyone go to work at all? We need to take another good look around, the guy thought. That douchebag Griff's gonna skin me. He's gonna send my paw to the president. Shit, I'm gonna get myself into this mess. When Griff parked his car near the cottage, he immediately had a feeling that something was wrong. First, the gate was wide open. Secondly, the doors to the cottage were also wide open. Thirdly, neither the dog nor his accomplice was anywhere to be seen. Wookie, Griff heard a shriek. "Wacky, get out!" Strengthened in his suspicions, the man rushed into the house. There he saw only a confused boy. In his hands he clutched a ball and squeaked at it. The young man looked away and pretended to be looking intently for something. "Where is our prisoner?" Griff asked. "You're gonna curse, boss," Jack replied. "You're gonna cuss. I tried to do your bidding and he broke free and ran away." "What?" the older man whispered. "Ran away?" "I did." Jack was outraged. "If you hadn't been out there and left me alone with that dog, none of this would have happened." The men began to swear and shout at each other. In the heat of their quarrel, they went out into the street, where they continued the debate with renewed vigor. "You young people don't understand a damn thing about revolutionary struggle," shouted Griff. "All you want is chips, beer, and consoles. Our ancestors shed blood, and you—" "What?" Jack argued. "You'd think you were the one who spilled blood. You didn't even want to get your hands dirty and run away. I'll give you a—" With these words, the young man clenched his fist and raised his hand high. Fighting was not in the plans of Griff. In addition, he was not sure that he could cope with this young laggard. "All right, calm down," said the older man. "Truce. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun is still high. We must act, now." Watching from his hiding place the pathetic efforts to find him, Woki seemed to smile. Most likely the dog was just opening his mouth to take a deep breath. But who knows what goes on in a little doggy's head? The intern's lot wasn't easy. At the law firm where she worked, they were always trying to put all the hard work on her. So she stayed late tonight. She'd had a hard time getting to Mason's house, first by train, then by bus. She walked another 20 minutes. It was almost 12 o'clock when she opened the door. "Good evening," her man said. He was sitting on the couch with the rescued dog. "Is he feeling better?" Ava asked. She was as worried about the little one as she was about her own brother. "A miraculous healing," smiled Mason. "He just got into good hands in time. You know, it's so awful when you can't save a patient." "Oh, Mason," Ava sighed. "You should have kids right now. I wish you'd put your energy in the right place." But the vet didn't hear those words again because he was scrutinizing Woki's belly. The doggy was recovering quickly. Already on the second day he had an appetite, and on the third day he began to cut circles around the house. One thing was bad. Now Ava was jealous of the charming Pekingese. "You won't even ask me how I'm doing," she said. "And why don't I come home until 12? "It's pretty obvious," Mason smiled. "You're a workaholic." "Maybe I have a lover?" Ava asked. "Don't be ridiculous," the vet said. "I know that you would never trade your career for some miserable pleasures." The man's words somehow cheered up the aspiring lawyer. She was really messing with a truth-teller. Luckily, Mason guessed to order a pizza, which was in a box in the kitchen. Ava heated up a slice, ate it with a Coke, and felt a little better. "Honey," she said, trying to come at it from the other side. "Yes, I stay at work sometimes. But have you ever seen me carry my papers in here?" "Sorry, honey. I don't pay attention to that sort of thing at all," the vet shrugged. "I'm not likely to notice any papers. Besides, don't forget, it's not safe to keep them here now. We got a pet. That was too much." Ava wasn't about to share her man with some dog. Besides, no pets in a house with children. And this is the result of the theme of children he does not want to develop, but animals want. However, as a true lawyer, Ava was not going to attack head-on. She needed a clever maneuver thanks to which she could get her way. "Strange," the woman said. "I started my relationship with a law-abiding man. Now I'm with a real criminal." "Such a nice dog," said the vet. "I'll keep him." "No way," Ava exhaled. "He has an owner. We have to find him." "Find the owner?" Mason asked. "Is that what you call the man who abandoned this beautiful baby to his fate?" "No, I can't part with this creature anymore. Look how he smiles." "Honey," Ava said. First of all, it's illegal to take someone else's property. Secondly, just think what's going through the mind of the real owner of this ball of fur. He must be worried sick. Nonsense, the vet said. I dropped the picture off to our guys. They looked through all the missing pet ads. There's nothing like it. By the way, they're only looking for 3 Pekingese, but 2 of them are females, so ours is out right away. Okay, thought Ava, but in her head she already had a plan to solve the problem. Quickly and efficiently. It had been several days since unknown criminals had stolen Woki. Fortunately, the press hadn't noticed the baby's disappearance yet. Mr. Bind caught himself thinking that he was able to get over the loss of his Pekingese, and although the pain of the loss grated on his heart, he was able to coexist with it. I have a report, the aide said, contacting the president. When will you be in? The unexpectedly cheerful voice gave Mr. Binder hope. He told him to come in at once. A couple minutes later, a cheerful Patrick appeared at the door. The assistant was hiding something under a towel, something small. Had his luck just run out? Here, look, Mr. President, Patrick smiled, removing the towel. He was holding a Pekingese in his arms. Found it, Mr. Bind exclaimed. He couldn't hide his joy. My boy, come here, not you, Patrick. Give me that furry little bugger. President accepted the burden and brought Wacky to him, hugged him, rubbed his belly. But the dog didn't respond to the caresses. In fact, he tried to pull away. He even whimpered a little. That's not Wacky, said the president, returning the animal to the aide. No, Patrick agreed. It's Toki. I figure if we can't get a double, we might as well pick a successor. Look, they look like 2 peas in a pod. Mr. Bind sighed. Yes, it's politics. All you have to worry about is ratings. But somehow he was not impressed by this approach. Maybe a successor was a good thing for the voter. But you still shouldn't have hurt him like that. What's the plan? The president asked. A press conference in 15 minutes, Patrick replied. Here, I've prepared the talking points. He held out a small folder of papers. Binder's memory was fading, and without a cheat sheet he felt uncomfortable in front of the press. However, having spent more than 30 years in politics, he'd learned to say meaningless talking points that would fit any issue. Good afternoon, said the president, raising his hand in greeting. We have gathered for a small briefing. Mr. Bind, shouted a pretty girl with bright red hair. How long are we going to tolerate the overpopulation of Chinese goods in our retail network? Thank you for your question, replied the president. As you know, fighting inflation is our priority. Therefore, we simply have to look for goods that would have a competitive price, and we can't close the market to them. What should our American producers do? The red-haired girl was indignant. Compete, Mr. Bind answered briefly, which drew a small round of applause. Everything went on from there. The moderator would point to a member of the media, and he would ask a question. We went through the Middle East, gun ban, juvenile delinquency, and other topics, in which Mr. Binde was a real ace. But suddenly the familiar pattern faltered. Mr. President, one of the reporters called out, ignoring the moderator. The pool colleague who was supposed to ask the question was simply pushed back by his mighty back. May I ask a question for the stuffy news? Go ahead, nodded the president, though he didn't like the disrupted order. There are reports in the media that Woki has been captured, the reporter said. How can you comment on this news? Nonsense, Mr. Bind said. I do not wish to comment on this nonsense. I would suggest that we focus on the national agenda to... Photographs have been published, the journalist interrupted him. How can you comment on that? I haven't seen the photos, but neural networks can generate any photo, the president shrugged, even of Donald Trump being arrested and resisting. Laughter erupted. The journalist scratched his head, looking for a new question, but he was immediately pushed back by other colleagues, shrugged off, squeezed by their bodies. Such liberties are not encouraged in the presidential pool. Meanwhile, Patrick was getting nervous. He pulled out his phone and actually found the photos. They were fresh. The Stuffy News had published them only 15 minutes ago. He started texting Big Paul to check it out right away. Immediately, I got a message from him with more questions than answers. "Calm down," the big guy wrote. "I think we've located him. An operation too complex and audacious to fail so ignominiously." Griff was ready to bite his elbows in frustration. Certainly some of the blame lay with him. He shouldn't have left those two knuckleheads alone. Worst case scenario, someone picked up the dog and brought him home. He's probably making an announcement right now. "Pekingees found. We act calmly, without panic," said Griff. "Our conflicts with you won't do any good. We need to find out who saw him." "How?" Jack asked. "Go up to some lady and ask her if the president's dog ran by." "Use your brain, comrade," said Griff, losing patience. "We need a cover story. Let's pretend we're looking for a black cat. A big black cat. Then they'll give us the Pekingees story. If you see anything, call me right away. Don't do anything on your own, you understand?" "Yeah," Jack nodded. "So, the dog's gone, vanished, disappeared. To increase the chances of success, the boys had to split up. Talking to the neighbors took up a lot of time. Most of them looked at him suspiciously. "Who did you say was missing?" A woman in her 40s with white hair asked from the house next door. "The cat." "Ah," Jack said. "Have you seen it?" "I haven't seen a cat," she said flatly. "I've seen a dog, no cat." "What is this? A menagerie?" "None of your business, ma'am," Jack said sharply. "We're a free country. You haven't seen a cat, I'll keep walking." "I haven't seen a cat or a dog," said the woman. "I hope that fluffy lump doesn't spoil my garden. I've got flowers growing here." She pointed to the pathetic lawn in front of the house. "You could call it a garden if you were in the desert." "It wasn't much to be proud of," Jack went on, "and in an hour had passed many houses, at least 30. At one of them, the door was opened by a black man of colossal stature and build. "The black cat is missing," Jack said, scratching his nose. "Huge, fat one. The full-bodied African-American man, 6 feet tall, looked at the young, impudent man carefully. He had a big A on his T-shirt. The man thought he had another racist at his door, and he wasn't about to take offense. "Who are you calling fat?" the African-American asked, taking the insolent man by the shirt. "You didn't mean the cat, did you?" "Cat," Jack said, and his voice trembled. "Seriously, mister, he ran off my property. It's a little farther down there." "What was his name?" growled the big man, not releasing his grip. Wacky Jack answered quickly, "Like the president's dog?" At these words, the African-American acted differently. He let go of the boy, smoothed his shirt, and smiled. "Oh, you're one of ours," the big guy said. "I'm sorry, but there are so many racists here. I'm tired of convincing them that my race is no worse than the white race, and even superior in some places. It's a shame the cat's missing. But don't worry, we'll find it. I'm going to put an ad in our chat room right now. Do you have any pictures?" No. Thanks, Jack waved his hands. "The cat's going to be out for a walk and then he'll be back." "Oh, come on," the African-American shouted. "The animal is in danger. We've got to find him. You don't want anything bad to happen to the cat, do you?" "No, sir," replied the anarchist. "Then let's go together," said the big man. "Every dog here knows me." "Do dogs run away too?" Jack asked, as if inadvertently. "Yes," the man nodded and put his big paw on Jack's back. "The last time was a week ago. We found him in no time." "Thanks for your help, mister, but I can handle it," the anarchist said. "No need to worry. I won't take no help from you," the man said. "I have a lot of experience, if anything." "Okay, there's not a minute to lose." In the meantime, the Griff was making his tour of the settlement. Alas, a brilliantly executed operation had ended in total failure. Wacky was gone for good this time. There's no way he's gonna get any attention now. It looked like a great idea. There's no liability for kidnapping animals for political purposes. It's not stealing. No one would have to be killed. However, he still had one more idea. Even if this dog escaped, he, Griff, could make a lot of money. But he'd have to act fast, before someone found the dog and returned it to its owner. In the morning, while Ava and Mason were getting ready for work, Woki was always running around. The girl couldn't figure out what was bothering her. Sure enough, she'd seen that animal somewhere before. I think it was in her ribbon, except the Peking geese had a red collar. "Listen," Ava asked, "does that little dog remind you of anyone?" Mason could list a dozen of his patients from memory who looked the same, give or take. Young male, up to 4 years old, you can tell by the teeth. Healthy and inspected. Fortunately, the injury was not serious. He's finally recovered. We'll have to keep an eye on the dog, though. See if he has other injuries he didn't notice. He reminds me of a dog that's been hurt by careless people, Mason sighed. What was the owner thinking? No collar, no chip, nothing at all. What are we going to do? Ava asked. We keep it, the vet shrugged. Of course I like bigger breeds. But Pekingese have their own charm. You know, they're so small and desperate warriors. If he likes us, he'll stand up for us. And he started giving his girlfriend a whole lecture on what a Pekingese is. That the breed had been bred centuries ago in China, that the little dogs were intelligent and loyal. At times like this, the woman usually had something on her mind. Mason was impossible to stop. You know what? Suddenly she asked. I think he's just cute. Look at him smile. But that's no reason to break the law. They looked at the Pekingese. He was really very handsome and charming. Looking at his rescuers, the dog opened his mouth a little. If he wanted, it could be taken for a smile. The vet brightened up and rubbed his patient on the scruff of the neck. He figured a dog like that would definitely want to play ball, or even frisbee. Their mornings getting ready for work were the most enjoyable times spent together. Mason could make breakfast, or Ava could make sandwiches. Then they'd have coffee together while they drove the car. Today was the first day since the Pekingese had been found that the vet had decided to leave him at home rather than bring him to work. In principle, they tolerate loneliness well, the man said as he drove the car. It's okay, I'll walk him tonight. Do you want me to tell you what he looks like? Ava smiled slyly. Mason nodded, and his partner's answer puzzled the experienced veterinarian. It even sent him into a mild shock. Arriving at the office, the girl immediately logged onto Facebook. She took a close look at Bender's page, and then did something that made her heart sink. Even though Mason wouldn't have approved of it, Ava took a few pictures and sent them to the president's account, stating that the Pekingese had been found in the Washington, D.C. suburbs without being overly precise in the description. Within 10 minutes, she received the message, and she couldn't believe what she read. When Mason returned from work that evening, he found neither the dog nor his woman. It seems Ava had packed in a hurry, because everything had been turned over in places. Although the daring action had ended in failure, Griff was not sad. Now he had money, and also motivation to act further. Soon, very soon, he would take his rightful place among the elite. That's what they're really like. Stupid, clumsy, lazy. The suspension of union reform is over. A sure sign that the dog has been found. Let's just say he made his money. Except his young accomplice has disappeared. He's probably upset about his failure. Well, let him suffer. This kid will still be useful to him. So do not lose touch with him. Maybe they can do something cooler in the future. Keep him close. We should get a couple or 3 more of these performers who aren't burdened with too much intelligence. Where have you been? Griff asked, watching Jack enter the house. I've been looking for a black cat named Wacky, with a huge black guy, who also almost beat me up when we first met. So, Griff yawned, did you find him? Yeah, Jack answered. I had a hard time convincing them the cat wasn't mine. Those animal advocates wouldn't believe me. They drove me around the state all night. I can't remember it. You know, Jack, you may have failed, Griff said, but we can still continue our work, cooperating for the common goal of protecting workers' rights. Like hell we can, he replied, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a can of beer. He opened it and took a sip with pleasure. Griff jumped on the spot in surprise. Why was the kid so upset with him? So what if he went for a ride with the animal protectors? It was an adventure. Besides, it's his own fault. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Jack asked irritably, pointing at his cell phone. Do you take me for an idiot? Griff looked at the screen. Escaped or stolen? Read the headline. Below it were pictures of the president's dog, the same one the news agency had given him a lot of money for. In one of them, he had no trouble identifying his own laminate. Jack must have gotten over it too. Relax, buddy, the ringleader said conciliatingly. All I did was drop them pictures to get some publicity for our action. When I realized the dog had escaped. Where's the rights thing? Jack was indignant. Where is it about workers? Not a word. So they lied to me, Griff shrugged. No, you're the one who cheated. The young man shouted. I'm leaving, my mom said. Don't trust leftists. I'm going to her. Where will you go? Griff smiled. You're nothing. You're a total zero. You can't even write. You'd have to start from scratch. Go back to school, for example. You're just reading my mind, Jack replied angrily. The first thing I'll do is get my diploma and a profession. I've had enough of this fight of yours. But he didn't have time to go back to school. A few hours later, Jack was sobbing and testifying at the police station and assured the officers that he'd done nothing wrong. Griff was brought to the station a little later thanks to his intuition. He left the house shortly before the arrival of law enforcement officers. But he didn't get far. Ava was gone for a second day. She hadn't returned his calls and ignored his messages. Mason felt devastated. Ava had been gone for 2 days. She hadn't returned his calls and ignored his messages. Mason felt devastated. Honey, he dictated a message to her. Please, I will take time off work to spend time with you. I will listen to you carefully and never interrupt you. I will never, ever take someone else's. Do you hear me? Call me back, okay? Kisses. The second cause for concern is the Pekingees. Why did Ava take him? It made sense, though. She must have found the real owner, gave it back to him, and decided not to do business with him. Mason anymore. The vet, devastated by his partner's behavior, couldn't do anything. He just sat there staring at the ceiling. The phone brought him out of his reverie. Had she decided to call, the number was unfamiliar. Mr. Mason. It was a thick bass, so low you could drill through a wall. Yes, the man answered. To whom do I have the honor of speaking? I represent the government, the man replied quickly. We'd like to ask you to step out onto the back patio. For a few minutes, right now, the back patio. The vet was surprised. It's kind of dirty out there. We can see that, answered the caller. And yet, Mason was confused. Had she notified the police as well? Then he'd be in a lot of trouble. He'd have to find a lawyer right away. The vet knew these guys charged a fortune for their clients, although he'd recently treated a cat that belonged to a lawyer. What was his name? Gathering his strength, Mason headed for the back door. Still, you gotta hand it to the police. They could have come in through the front door, and the neighbors would have noticed. There's a small chance of saving face. Hello? Said the vet, opening the door. And he couldn't believe his eyes. A real delegation had gathered just outside his house. At the very gate stood a man, a huge African-American man with a good-natured face. This big guy's on TV all the time. What's his name? Just behind him, on his right hand, stood a woman in a strict suit and smiled sternly, and on his right hand was a typical American with a white smile. A little farther away, thoughtful, crestfallen men kept a watchful eye on the surroundings. A good dozen cars with government license plates could hardly fit on their small road. One of them carried small American flags. "Good evening," Mason said, and wished he'd worn something decent before going out on the back patio. He embarrassed himself by shucking his robe, underneath which was an old t-shirt, stained with stains. "Greetings," nodded the head of the delegation. "I apologize for the lack of notice."